What's up, everybody? Renfail here, and the third draft of the ORC license is now available for people to go through and provide feedback on. I think originally they had intended on only needing to do two drafts, but they have now expanded this to going into a third draft because they really want to nail it down and make sure they've got the language right. I would also say that this is partly one of the issues when you have so many different people coming to the table and providing feedback. The benefit of that is that you're going to get lots of great ideas and things that you might not have thought of to put into the license. But the downside to that is it can turn it into a never-ending committee where it takes a lot longer to get things done than you might originally anticipate because there are so many voices at the table and no one ever is quite right, quite ready to say it's done. It's always like one more thing. Can we tweak this one more thing? Eventually, you just have to say enough's enough. We're good to go. But they are trying to create a document that is perpetually something that is going to govern um, things moving forward. So in any case, the third draft is ready for comment. Now I've already kind of opened these up and kind of skim read through it, so we don't need to look at the AXE document, which is the like questions and answers thing. However, one of the things I love that they've done this time around is they've provided us with some redlined version, which shows us the changes. This is because after the second draft, a lot of people, myself included, were complaining that we didn't see any way to determine between the changes from the first draft to the second draft, and we were having to read through things with a fine-tooth comb and try to figure out where the changes were. Just provide us with the red line, and we can easily see where those changes were made. And now they've done that. So we can kind of scroll through here and notice that right away. And yes, it's going to be white. There's no way for me to do a black background here. So it is what it is, everybody. So prepare thine eyes for whiteness. We can see stuff that has been, deleted. They've now changed product identity to being known as reserved material, which I find to be a very interesting. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. You can call it duck roast for all I care. But I think that they're further trying to separate themselves from the OGL by saying, well, we're not going to call ours product identity, we're going to call it reserved material. So a lot of the stuff is just, deleting objects, rewording things, deleting some sections and replacing it with other stuff. Until we get down here towards the end, we're going to start to see whole paragraphs that are new. So, for example, how are translations treated under the ORC? It says here you're free to translate licensed material into another language. As a publisher creating a translated product from licensed material, you would use an ORC notice in your derivative work. This notice in your derivative work must attribute the translation to its legal owner, and the translation's attribution must be included in the ORC notice of downstream publishers who publish products using that translation. They have a whole bunch more of deleted stuff, so on and so forth. And then we get down to another new section. I wish to submit an article that includes game mechanics from my ORC licensed game to a magazine or website with several different articles on a variety of game systems. If using any ORC content in a work means licensing the relevant portions of the entire work, does the inclusion of my article in this magazine or website mean that all of the mechanical material by other contributors who may not even be aware of my contribution is now open under the terms of the ORC license? And the answer here is that the definitions of work and adapted work anticipate products that are built on one exclusive system or certain types of aggregate works. If a product has distinct sections related to a variety of game systems, only the portions of the product related to the system you licensed under the ORC license would be required to be licensed back out as an adapted work under the ORC license. Given that, the person asks, can I include game mechanics for multiple game systems within my product, isolating ORC license derived game rules in an appendix so that only material that would be required to be licensed back out? And the answer to that would be yes. We have another new section here which says, does the ORC license allow me to copy descriptive text of mechanical game elements verbatim from upstream products? For example, if I'm using a spell, can I reproduce the text of that spell exactly in my product? What about a full monster description? How do I know how to correctly draw the line between where licensed material like this starts and stops? That's the beautiful thing about the ORC, everybody. You don't have to worry about that to a degree. Says here you are licensed to use licensed material verbatim, which means anybody who has made their content available in the ORC has put their stuff out there as licensed material, and you are therefore allowed to use that downstream verbatim. It says where the description of a monster contains creative descriptions that are not required for operation of that monster, you are not licensed to include those descriptions. That's the distinction. Um, so creative descriptions that are not required for operation of that monster would be lore related story reasons. So your reserve material, your product identity as it were, if your monster can only do something under the sun because they were bred that way because of the manipulation of these wizards and the combination of these things because the lore of your world says so. That part is unique to your world, but the mechanics of the monster, how the monster works, that's stuff that you can copy verbatim. It says these descriptions add rich, colorful imagery are probably not reasonably necessary to convey functional attributes of the game system and are thus outside the scope of what you are licensed to use. Minor embellishments, such as the beam of sickly green light, lack sufficiently rich creativity and expression to function as reserve material, so it would need to be more than just saying beam of sickly green light. It says here, what is a sufficiently delineated character? The term sufficiently delineated character is a test under U.S. copyright law that describes when a character has sufficient attributes to rise above substantial similarity to a single specific expression and relates more broadly to a collection of attributes so well defined that even if put into a completely new situation, we would recognize the character as being Tarzan or Superman. By using this expression, we are expressly pulling in that body of case law. That's very interesting. Um, Hey everyone, Renfail here with the commercial part of the video where I say, hey, if you like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. And thanks to all of our supporters are here on YouTube and over on Patreon, our highest members, our guild champions, Crazy's Relative, Remy D here on YouTube. And don't forget if you want to support, it's really easy. You can do the memberships below, the Adventurers Guild, 3 different tiers. There's also the super thanks on any uploaded video or YouTube short that you find. There's also, of course, the super chats and stickers that you could do on any live stream or premiere, and the Patreon page if you want to dive into the fantasy world that I have with my brother and my wife, which is a tabletop game, a point and click adventure game, and a fantasy book series. All are great ways to keep this channel going and me going full time. Thanks again for those of you who support. Let's get back to the video that you're watching now. Okay. Says here, how would this work for, say, a stat block that contains a proper noun or trademark? Proper nouns and trademarks are not licensed under the ORC. While the concept and most contents of a stat block, which contains an aggregation of functional information, is predominantly licensed material, all proper nouns and trademarks would need to be edited out. For example, using the previously referenced spell, Bimble's Bursting Bunyan, downstream publishers wishing to reproduce the mechanical elements of the spell would be best off simply deleting Bimble's name entirely and listing the spell as Bursting Bunyan. Or they could change it to something else. They could, Rufus's rupturing wrinkle. I don't know. Likewise, should the spell's description include non-mechanical descriptions related to Bimble and his invention of the spell, that material not being required for the application of the spell would also not be considered licensed content. Publishers operating in good faith are encouraged to consider the difficulties faced by downstream publishers who must excise this material from commonly referenced game elements like spells and equipment and may wish to avoid this type of naming construction to make things easier on downstream publishers. I love the concept behind that. Let's make things as easy as possible for the people who are going to be potentially using it downstream. Says another question is, how does one define what is and what is not licensed material under the terms when adapting material from one game system to another? For example, for most RPGs, a character's name, details of their upbringing, and overall fashion sense would not be considered licensed material because it's reserved material. Um, those details can be varied with the alternate method of the character. However, I'd like to use the ORC license to incorporate the presumed reserved material into my original RPG Age of Epochs, a narrative game in which the descriptive elements like hair color, fashions, and details of a character's upbringing are critical to the game mechanical play of my game. Can I do this? What impact might it have on downstream? Man, that is a complex question that seems like such a extreme edge case. Because we can't vary the definitions of reserved material and licensed material in a flexible way, the default will be that a truly narrative-based game system would predominantly be considered reserved material and not available for use. I agree with that. It's like saying, if I had if the Jedi and everything about the Jedi were integral to the telling of a story about a Jedi or the playing of a game about the Jedi, then everything is so distinctly and directly tied to everything that Jedi is, from the name to the way they dress to the way they work, all the proper nouns, everything else. There's no way that you're ever going to be able to separate that out well enough to distinguish between the two, and therefore that's just reserved material that you're not going to be able to use. It says, despite that, you as the publisher of that content could open it up for use as licensed material simply by describing the content as explicitly designated licensed material in your ORC notice. But that's on you. It says here, is a stat block protectable trade dress and therefore protectable reserved content under the ORC. It says here, the purpose of a stat block is to effectively convey a multitude of functional elements of a character. While in rare cases there may arise protectable trade dress rights in the border design or color combinations, the content and descriptions do not constitute trade dress and are licensed material under the ORC license. So this comes back to how one of the things that Wizards of the Coast tried to nail down very early on was that they considered their trade dress to be distinctive for all Dungeons and Dragons related material. So they would go after anybody who had a book that had any similar fonts or coloring to what they were using, because they were saying our trade dress is so distinctive that it's, we've that's our product identity. So by they're saying here very clearly, um, those cases might be extremely rare and are based purely upon like border design or color combination. So if you're using your logo in the border design, that's going to be trade dress, but it would have to be, very distinguishable as your trade dress. You know what I mean? It's kind of like McDonald's. Everyone knows who McDonald's is because they have the big M. That's their trade dress. Everything they do has the big M branded on top of it, so that you never misunderstand who McDonald's is. That's essentially what we're talking about here. Says here, some third-party reserved material licensors may want to add something near your ORC noticing, saying that their IP does not constitute ORC content, which we believe is acceptable, but that's going to be on a case-by-case basis, and you will have to work that out with the person upstream whose content you're using. Then they get into a whole bunch of stuff here about, can I use CC BY content in my ORC license? It is possible to include CC BY license content in an ORC license work. This is really crazy edge cases. You would to make sure, yeah, it would be up to you to make sure your use of both the CC BY and the ORC license content are both in compliance with the requirements of both licenses. That sounds way too freaking complicated. Why would you ever want to do that? I don't understand a scenario where you would want to do that unless people are saying, well, I want to create a hybrid blend of 5th edition and Pathfinder, and I'm going to pull in both of those. That sounds like a nightmare scenario. If my product is wholly original to my own work and does not use any content from other publishers, can I release it licensed under both ORC and Creative Commons? Yes, you could, but as they state here, that can be a complex issue with potential conflicts that could arise simply by trying to comply with varying license requirements, creating a risk for you and any publishers who use your content. It's very clear. Having a clear option is very, very important. I'm trying to see if there's anything other usually read here. Is it a breach of the ORC license to use a license as restricted material? Technically, it is not a breach of the ORC license to use a license as restricted material, but the ORC license does not grant you any right to use said material. While you do not warrant or represent that you won't use material under the ORC license, which makes use of that as a breach, the ORC's license silence unrestricted material doesn't mean you're free to use it. The license specifically avoids granting rights or addressing remedies with respect to restricted material. It does this so that the owner of the intellectual property can seek whatever remedies courts allow. For this reason, the unauthorized use of restricted material does not automatically trigger termination section. Okay, so that makes sense. Breach only arises if you fail to grant back to the community, to the ORC, and your adapted license, or you try to apply different terms to downstream users. Or you fail to include the required notice. Okay, so that's a much more in-depth update compared to the second draft, I feel, and it's got a lot more contingencies added to it, which is not a bad thing. So I would say, for those of you who are super interested in this, make sure to get involved over in the ORC Discord, so you can be part of the ongoing conversation as it unfolds and to provide feedback on the drafts as they become available. But right now, we can give feedback on the third draft, which I just read through. You can dig through it at your leisure. Links will be down below. Till next time, everybody, stay safe and happy gaming.